Hi everyone. So today our lesson will be about virtue ethics. Theories that fall under the heading of virtue ethics are all an evolution and exploration of philosophical themes first outlined thousands of years ago in the writings of Aristotle. In virtue ethics, moral fortitude is based on rules, but only because the rules are applied by the agent or person. Virtue ethics is agent-based because agents use a moral code they have adapted for themselves, and that moral code is made up of true, honorable, and just virtues that guide their actions. Most of these virtues are qualities that the individual's culture or society has ingrained upon him or her as being very important. These virtues are the building blocks of a truly moral individual. So some of the ethical notions that come under the virtue ethics umbrella that we will discuss in this chapter include the divine command theory, the natural law ethics, the relativism, and moral realism. Defined simply, a virtue is a highly regarded personality trait or aspect of character, and we need virtues. While many so-called virtues are almost universal, they are broadly defined as deeply held value by a person that intrinsically leads him or her to behave in a certain way. Virtues affect how we absorb the world around us and act in the world. Virtues influence actions, feelings, desires, choices, and reactions, all of which are predictable in person if that value is deeply held. And while these values may lead a person to act out instinctively, they are learned behaviors that are well thought out and deeply felt on the level of religious belief. The most precious virtues seem like they are intrinsic to a person's nature, so affirmed they can be. These virtues are authentic and adhere to rules that are nice for the way people live and function together in a society. These virtues also take feelings into consideration as well as personal well-being and the well-being of others. In ancient Greece and up to the medieval era, the type of virtue ethics now called eudaimonism was synonymous with virtue ethics. This approach holds that the ideal goal of human existence is individual eudaimonia, which translates variously to happiness or well-being or the good life. This goodness is attainable by the acting out of those virtues which the Greeks called pronesis, day in and day out in one's thoughts and actions. The main problem is that eudaimonia or happiness is vaguely defined, self-defined, and quite subjective. It's hard to have a universal approach to the ethical outlook of humanity if everyone defines the goal differently. So what is objective and seemingly universal, however, is that pronesis is the tool by which happiness can be achieved. However, good intentions are not enough. One must act ethically to be ethical. So another form of virtue ethics is ethics of care. It's a relatively recent addition to the world of ethics, and it was developed in the late 20th century as an outgrowth of feminist theory particularly the works of Annette Bayer. So the theory supposes that normative gender roles influence the way a person thinks and acts, particularly as it concerns that person's ethical outlook. Generally speaking, men form philosophies based on linear masculine ideals such as justice and personal autonomy, which are more abstract, objective, and less emotionally based or sympathetic. So women, on the other hand, may think less linearly and consider whole beings and take empathy and care into consideration more so than masculine-based ideals. So the ethics of care argues for an approach to moral philosophy from a more traditionally female viewpoint, and that the most important virtues are taking care of others, being patient and nurturing, and being and willing to sacrifice one's own happiness so as to bring happiness to others. And the third type of virtue ethics fall under the umbrella of agent-based theories is a 20th century development primarily by philosopher Michael Slot. These theories rely on creating virtues from common sense notions about what virtues are. So this approach uses the largest, the most normal, and the most lauded virtues across time and culture. Such general virtues, for example, include being kind and showing mercy. Agent-based theories move the burden of ethics to the inner life of the agents who perform the actions, and away from the interpreter of the moral philosophy. So virtue-based ethics exist in other morally decent people, and so we try to be more like them as we do our best to embody and adapt their virtues as our own. So as mentioned earlier, we have these kinds of virtue ethics. First is a divine command theory, the idea that all good behaviors and the virtues that guide them are laid out explicitly by a divine figure such as God. If God said it's good, and if God says bad, it's bad. We also have natural law ethics, a theory developed by Thomas Aquinas that finds human nature is one and the same with the ethical goodness, and that it is human nature to adopt virtues and act virtuously. We also have this relativism, the notion that virtues and thus ethical strictures can vary from culture to culture because of the different values and needs of its culture. Relativism holds that it's not correct to judge or make statements about absolutes. And we also have moral realism, is an opposing viewpoint to relativism. Under this philosophy, there are some moral truths and values that are objectively good, whether or not an individual or even community chooses to accept them as much. So moral anti-realism then is the idea that there are no objectively morally right virtues. One of the things that makes moral philosophy or ethics such a unique subset of philosophy is its focus on the individual's application of the truth and his or her role in spreading the truth. Other parts of philosophy are all about truth and purpose as abstract concepts. It's ethics where those ideals play out in real-world thoughts and actions. So ethics asks, how do we as humans utilize this truth in how we behave? So there happens to be one ethical school that makes figuring all that out just a little bit easier. In divine command theory, people are supposed to do what God says is right and should not do what God says is wrong. It's as simple as that. Of course, doing that day in and day out is not simple, as any deeply religious person can tell you. So divine command theory states that the ethical thing to do is what a divine figure would do or has told you to do. A lot of it has been laid out in the form of holy texts, but not everything is there, and especially not for modern problems in a changing world. That's why, in terms of discussion and debate, divine command theory is just as complicated and profound as the other schools of ethics. So many schools of ethics factor in several different criteria when considering whether or not an act is moral. So in divine command theory, an act is considered moral or immoral based solely on God's judgment about it. For example, if God says stealing is wrong, then stealing is wrong. Augustine was a philosopher and theologian early in the development of the Christian church, and he combined early Christian teachings with some elements of Neoplatonism and laid down the basics for divine command theory as a philosophical framework, providing specifics and rationale beyond the overly simplistic idea of because God said so. To Augustine, ethics could be defined as the quest for supreme goodness, which in turn provides the happiness that humans are forever seeking out.